We start off with a presentation from what I can say my colleague Cécile Billaux from DG Trade, and she will talk about the trade perspective, of course, from the Commission side. She has been working on trade issues, but also on SPS for the Commission and in the private sector beforehand. Cécile, we start with you and then continue with the other presentations. Please.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Wim, for the introduction. It's the first time I attend this briefing, and I wanted also to say thank you to Isolana, because it's really, this morning, the first panel has been really informative, a lot of facts, a lot of elements, and a lot of things also that goes in the same direction of the thinking of what we're trying to do, both with trade policy, but also in association with colleagues on the development cooperation side and colleagues from DG Agri. So trying to address the different challenges that we talked this morning. So I'm going to try to, in my presentation, not to repeat some of the things that have been said this morning, but rather to build on what was said and to try to make the link of how we can contribute and where we are struggling also and want to make more progress. So starting first with some facts and figures in general about trade, not specific to agri, but about EU and ACP trade. I'm supposed to move this, to change the slide, or there's thank you very much. The green one. Green? Okay. It works. So some general facts, just to keep that in mind. I'm sure you're all very much aware that the EU is still, for Africa, the first aid, trade and investment partner. So that's figures that compares basically our numbers in terms of facts with China and US, because we're more talking about especially China rise in Africa, and it's sometimes good to have a picture and keeping in mind where our relationship stands at the moment. Interestingly, if we look at trade, you see that trade for EU-Africa, it represents 32.9%. These are 2018 figures. But if you look at the evaluation of trade in the past 10 years, so if you look at the figures from 2008 compared to 2018, this trade between EU and Africa has increased. It has increased for African export to the EU of 22% and for EU export to Africa of 11%, so less than the other direction, but still an increase for both partners, and a double increase for Africa. Same for FDI, actually, which is also an important area. It was recalled by our colleagues from Madagascar. The importance of investment, it's not only trade, but investment is very important, what we invest in Africa. And we can see that the EU is still the first in terms of FDI stock. It's true in terms of the flows, FDI flows. We are not as big as other partners at the moment, other third country, especially China, but still what we have in terms of stock in Africa is we are on the first position. Now, also something very general, but it is something good to recall also the broader Commission EU strategy with Africa and this project of the Alliance, the EU-Africa Alliance that was launched by President Juncker about a year ago now, which really tried to strengthen the trade, the economic, but the broader relationships that we have between Africa and Europe with a strong economic strand, but not only. Also, very important stand on skills, investment for job creation, education, but in this context also a very important tool which is dealt with colleagues by DG DEFCO, the External Investment Plan, which is really aiming at fostering with new tool, blending, guaranteeing mechanism to foster more investment on the African continent. And also as part of this overall new dynamic for our relationship between Africa and Europe and Africa, was also created 4 task force, and I'm sure you are aware there was also one task force dedicated on rural Africa, which was led by Commissioner Hogan for Agriculture, and was the first task force actually created, and which delivered already recommendation on which the EU is working. Now looking at the trade and the access that African countries have to the EU markets. So you see a map which is complex, and it is complex. You have to be really, to have studied it or to be a bit of a trade expert, of a nerd, to know exactly which country falls within which regime. On the EU, we have different tools. We have what we call the general system of preference, and within this general system of preference, we have three main mechanisms. One is really for the LDC, the least developed countries, called EBA, Everything But Arms, and it guarantees free access to our markets, so you can export duty-free, quota-free, all goods except arms. Then we have another mechanism which is less preferential. It's called GSP, the standard GSP, and it's for it's actually preference for 66% of tariff lines, and it's dedicated. It's not. It's for developing countries. So because developing country, when they lose, when they're no longer LDC, can no longer benefit of Everything But Arms, and they fall into GSP, which is a preferential mechanism, unilateral one, but less preferential than the Everything But Harm. And we have also a third mechanism under the general system of preference, which is called GSP+, which is a mechanism which we have really promoted in the past years, and will be there to stay, and will be, I guess, even more promoted. It's really linking the preference that we give to third country. And I mean, this is not specific to Africa, this is to all the world, so to developing country, to some also condition on sustainable development. But basically, this is linked to international standards and the convention that a country would have ratified and implemented convention in the area of labor, environment, and human rights. It's called the GSP+. So if we have this addition of sustainability element and we have a guarantee that the country has ratified and implemented, we provide better access to our market. Actually, it's free access to our market for 66% of the tariff line. So it's a better condition, but linked to some sustainable development criteria. And then, of course, we have the economic partnership agreement with African country, which are agreements which have been negotiated for a long time and are now coming into place and starting to be more and more implemented in Africa. And then we have also other regime like North Africa. Of course, it's not economic partnership agreements. They are under free trade agreement, which means they don't have free access to our EU markets. They have preferential access, but not free. But all in all, with this different regime, what we can say today is that most of the African countries have preferential access to our market because of these different arrangements. Now, focusing on the economic partnership agreement, because I think it's also more relevant to discuss, to focus on sub-Saharan Africa. We have, and here you have a map of the world, because economic partnership agreements have been negotiated not only for African countries, but also for countries in the Caribbean and Pacific. But so in total, we have 31 countries today implementing an economic partnership agreement. But looking at focusing on Africa, we have now 14 countries in Africa. We have a big regional agreement with ESA. This was actually Eastern, Southern, and African country, 5 countries there, which are mainly the Indian Ocean island, Mauritius, Seychelles, Madagascar, but also Zimbabwe and Comoros. They have been implementing a partnership agreement with us since 2012, and we are currently in the process of deepening this partnership agreement and to make it much more ambitious, not only covering goods, but covering services and covering also investment, which is something also important for agriculture, covering also being more ambitious on agriculture, covering a chapter on agriculture with increased cooperation. Well, we will propose, we are starting the negotiations, I'm going too fast, so it's not yet covering that, but that's something we want to propose in the the negotiation, more cooperation on agriculture, including on geographical indications and other value chains also development to enhance really the potential of our partner to export value-added product, agricultural product to the EU. So that's one block of 5 countries implementing a regional EPA. Then we have a second block implementing regional EPA, and this is a block in Southern Africa, the so-called SADC EU EPA, with South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Eswatini, Swaziland, and Mozambique. So the SACU partner plus Mozambique. Now it's been implemented for 3 years. And we have also 3, so to say, individual country implementing EPA in the western part of Africa, being Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and Cameroon. We are still hoping and still devoted to get the regional agreement with West Africa with 16 countries finally implemented, but we're still waiting for it to be signed by all the countries. Now, another brief and quite general remark about the question, okay, do our free trade agreement, do they deliver? And in particular, the economic partnership agreement, do they deliver? It's a valid question. It's not always an easy question to answer because it's often not black and white. In some cases, you have very good cases. Other cases may be more difficult. But overall, what we are doing and what I wanted to raise your attention to today, we have been doing now in DG Trade a yearly implementation report of our FTA, our free trade agreement. And this implementation report covers all the economic partnership agreements. We've annexed with really a lot of information on each of our regions and the figures, how it evolves, what has taken place in terms of implementation, committee discussion, and so on. We just published, I think it's last week or 2 weeks ago, the new one, the new edition of this implementation report. It is available on our website. I'll also put the link there for 2019. And I've extracted there some relevant development for EPA, for Africa, and EPA more in particular, which are interesting to mention today. So these figures mainly implementation report is done on a yearly basis. So we compare from the year before to the year in question. So it's a comparison between 2017 and 2018, how the trade has evolved. And if we look at now the 31 countries, so here it's not only Africa, it's also capturing Caribbean and Pacific countries. We have seen that the trade with this partner in a year, it has increased on average by 5%. Again, and I think if we take only the African country, is roughly the same number. It's about 5% too. Of course, for some country we have seen decrease, and some country we have seen an increase. So it's an average. So it's not a picture is not the same for all countries. But we see overall a trend of continuation of increase in trade. But this is just one indicator. But okay, you take it for what it is. But it's one indicator of the trade which continues to increase between us. We have put some examples also in some areas, especially agriculture, where we see increased import also from African country to the EU. One interesting other element which we have seen when we are doing this report is that and I think some of a speaker this morning talked about that, which is a big challenge, is the diversification of African economy and diversification in terms of trade. This is a challenge, but what we have seen in a year is that in EPA implementing country, this is the diversification in terms of their trade is gradually improving. So there has been an increase in terms of manufacturing export to the EU. So the most sophisticated product exported to the EU have been increased by about 7.7%. So it is a positive trend. Maybe this trend should be quicker, but we could still see an increase. The rest, I leave it to you to read in more detail if you're interested into this implementation report. Now, if we look a little bit more at the tools that we have in trade policy, as I said before, especially the economic partnership agreement and how they benefit agriculture and the development of agriculture on the African continent. Again, and I think also this was interesting this morning because many of the issues and topics that were mentioned by the speakers, it's also exactly what the same objective, exactly the same things we're trying to reach via our economic partnership agreement. So at least we're trying to make a contribution to it in terms of developing regional trade, because EPAs by nature have been negotiated with region, with strong regional integration dimension. And an example of that, which I'm sure you've heard about it, it's that we also give preferential routes of origins within the region. So it allows really a country that will, for example, produce banana, and then in the next country, you will have a factory producing the dried banana, and still they would have this, they could export it to the EU or to any other country without getting, still benefiting from the preference that they have with the EU and with other countries. So you have very, very extensive cumulation, what we call in trade jargon, provision in it, and also regional mechanism, just by the fact of having an agreement all together and being in the same part of an agreement with the EU, reinforce all these regional integrations. That I think it's something that the African, by doing the ACFTA, are keen to do, and that it's something that will contribute to the development of trade and growth, economic growth on the continent. With EPA, we are also trying to make a contribution to investment, and this is important in the fact that it is, we have really linked to our economic partnership agreement. We have also programs linked to it, aid for trade programs that really support infrastructure, that support also capacity building, that make sure you have a reform agenda in the country, also to improve the business climate, because for investment, what we need to make sure that our EU company have more guarantee in terms of investing in the country. They pay a lot of attention to governance. I think the colleagues from the African Development Bank was also making the point, and then we really need to support this reform agenda that is taking place in African country to ensure that our investors are less risk adverse to invest in the country. Also important to recall, I mean, it's I should have mentioned it, started with that, but it's sort of probably self-evident. The Economic Partnership Agreement provide market access to the EU, free market access to the EU, so duty-free, quota-free, even if a country as part of EPA is no longer a least developed country, it has a free access to our market. And this is important to recall that this is only with the economic partnership agreements that we provide, that the EU provide free access to our market to developing country. Often, and it's quite interesting because before taking up this job, I recall also in previous meeting we had country in Asia, also developing country in Asia saying, but we also want to have an EPA because EPA are great because we have free access to our market. And no, this is not a tool that we offer to other countries. This is a specific tool only for ACP country. And it's full liberalization. In exchange of that, and then it's also interesting because this full liberalization to our market, for example, if you compare with countries in Latin America with whom, and Central America with whom we have negotiated free trade agreement, they don't have free access to our market. So still in terms of preference, they may have no duty, but for a limited amount of product, like if you take banana. So basically we still have, and this is a topic which is important, how the preference, erosion of preference. Indeed, the more we do free trade agreements, the more the preference may be less important, but still nobody and none of our other partners have free access to our EU market. So this still remain, and this is strong, something that is important to recall with the EPA. Now also, in exchange to the free access to our market, there is also liberalization on the side of African countries. It depends each of the EPA, but it's about 80%, let's say roughly, of liberalization for our EU import to African country and for the entrance. Again, this is something that has been negotiated together with our partner on mainly products that were needed as input for the industry, as entrant, like the colleague from Madagascar say. That being said, it is sometimes useful to have this product liberalized so they are cheaper for the industry, but this is not to avoid investment on the other side. This go hand in hand with also trying to promote investment on the African continent. Sometimes in turn you need first to establish the industry, and then as the country will develop, it will have its own investment and can also supply, get the products directly from its market. But as a temporary solution, it is, and we see something that is needed, especially if we want to move up the value chain, as it was discussed also this morning, and make sure that we have Africa is developing more products, processed products and products which are higher value added. So you need really input, and you need more sophisticated industry to be able to produce such value-added products, which are indeed very important for Africa to develop is trade in agri-food products, and something that is bringing also more value added to the continent. Last but not least, we also have safeguard mechanism in our economic partnership agreement, meaning that if the import of EU product in a certain area, and in agricultural products, there is specific clause for agricultural product, disturbs the local market in Africa to a point that there is an injury, then we can just stop. We can use safeguard mechanism, meaning you impose a new duty, which will have an effect on the level of import, and then protect the local market from a surge of imports coming from the EU. And the last thing also that we have in EPA, and I mentioned a bit before, it's really providing also a platform for dialogue. So we have committees, we have various also subcommittee close exchange with our partner, bilateral level and at regional level, that really make a platform for dialogue. And on that also, we talked this morning quite a lot about cocoa. There was also, I think, Oxfam also mentioning the importance of the income for farmers. And if we look at cocoa and what has taken place now in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, with this intention also from the government to guarantee a minimum price for cocoa to ensure that the farmers would have a better income in that. And this is really something we have tried also together with also colleagues from DEFCO to support this initiative, to get involved into it, and to organize. Our delegation organized last week, I think it was a round table on cocoa. And really this makes things easier because we have a close relationship with our partner. Côte d'Ivoire is one of our EPA partner, and then you can organize this one table and talk to the government and relevant actor easily, and then try to to understand how the system could work in practice, and especially could also be linked to sustainability elements in the cocoa supply chain. Moving on to some more facts and figures. I have 3 minutes left, so I have to be quick. Okay, I'm going to be very quick on this one because I think it was covered by most of the presentation this morning. What we see indeed is an increase in terms of EPA partners' agricultural export to the EU. We have a figure of 52% increase in the past 10 years. We have also, and this is a very important topic, we have some good indicator of creating more local value addition for agricultural products, but still not enough, because this is where really the focus should be put. I think this was sort of consensus for this morning. And we have still traditional commodities, which are still representing most of African agricultural export. Some also struggle, and some cases that we have seen a decrease in the export from African country. For example, banana, only Cameroon in the past 2 years, the exports have been decreased in banana, also probably linked to extra competition for Latin America. For Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, the trade is still stable, but Cameroon we've seen a struggle, and it is an EPA country. Sugar, the same. Most of our partners have seen their sugar export to the EU decrease, and this is due to the worldwide competition, because if you look at the overall EU figures, I mean, the imports of sugar for the EU are higher than the exports. So we are still importing a lot. It's not because the EU import less, but we're importing from other countries and no longer from Africa, and it's a lot about Brazil and other countries. So here we have something also to work on and to see what is feasible to enhance sugar or more processed product for African countries to be able to compete. So the title of the session was Success Stories. So we look a little bit at some successes that we have seen in our EPA partner. And it's quite, I mean, I like looking at that because it gives you really a pragmatic sense of the result of our work, which can seem very theoretical and very boring and legal. But at the end of the day, what we've seen in many of our EPA partners, we have seen some good development taking place, which have been facilitated by the EPA, both by the free access to our market, but also by capacity buildings that we've been provided together with the EPA. And this example of baby vegetable from Eswatini is especially an example I quite like, because now you've seen that about 1,500 farmers have been producing these baby vegetables, so the smaller carrots, the smaller tomato, and so on, and have been exporting it to the region, to South Africa, increasingly, and also to the EU. And this is really an increase for them. In the beginning, for export to the EU, it was an issue because of also SPS standards, quite high SPS standard, but that's where we also coupled it with some capacity building program, which allows them to have higher standards and to be able to export under EU standards. But also, importantly, to the region, and especially to South Africa. And that's the regional also dimension that we want to promote, we are promoting with the EPA. Also, another example, the grapes from Namibia, and here again, an increase of 35% in 3 years of the export to the EU. And it created jobs, of course, seasonal and permanent jobs. So we've seen that since the start of the EPA, which has been implemented in 2016. 2 other successes in other regions. Well, we talked a lot this morning about cocoa. It's still, and I think everybody can agree on that, it's still the majority of imports to the EU of cocoa. It's raw cocoa, but still we have seen, as regard the figure of import of cocoa paste, butter, and powder have increased over 10 years of 136%. So it's still, the figures are tiny in comparison to commodity, but still there is an increase. So something that needs to build further on and continue the work in this direction. Another example, which is something completely different, but I think it's something that is needed also for African countries to reflect about this sort of niche market, or this sort of really added value product. This specific plant in Madagascar, which is, I didn't know about it, but apparently this periwinkle has really some cancer-fighting property, and it is really produced in Madagascar under certain conditions there. More than 5,000 local farmers are just producing this specific flower and then send it to a French company who has invested there in Madagascar, Pierre Fabre, to develop some medicinal products. So this is also something nice, because then the company, of course, can send this product back to the EU and free access to our market. Okay, shortly, also to bring it to the discussion on this morning on the ACFTA, shortly we do believe strongly, and we see in practice, that the economic partnership agreement are benefits to the African continental FTA, because it shares the same objective. At the core of it is really the regional trade. There we see them really as building block to the benefits of ACFTA, because it reinforces the regional also integrations, small that will help building on the continental level. It brings a partnership, but also it brings a capacity to our EPA partner, because we have capacity building also programs to really help to understand trade and what can work, and the mechanisms that are sometimes complex, so that's something that African partner will need also in the context of the continental negotiation. Last thing is the task force for rural Africa I discussed in the morning, and this is colleagues from DG Agri which are in the room and are working intensively together with the African Union on implementing the recommendation, and some of the recommendations are very concrete and interesting, especially building this African Union EU agribusiness platform in some of the African countries, putting business from both sides to see how we can invest in Africa for the EU and how it can be exported better with African company to the EU. We have also this multi-stakeholder dialogue, which is something also, I guess, of interest to many of you. And actually, my colleague from DG Agri was saying that they have now, they're planning to do the next one on milk issue, which is an important issue also. Oxfam talked about it in November or before the end of the year. Important also that we are also in this framework working on a sort of continental strategy for GIs, geographical indication, trying to support African Union ambition to also develop a quality policy for food products and also capacity building for SPS. I will stop here, and I know I've taken a bit more time than needed, and I hope it's still time for questions.
Many thanks, Cécile, and what you had to say was very interesting. So no problem if it takes time, of course.